My name is Ahmed. I mainly do architecture, code reviews, and identity and access management. I like to share stuff with my colleagues, and mainly I do presentations at the Microsoft office. Today I decided to do it here because it's related to security. So I'll be talking about mass assignments and overpostings in ASP.NET MVC. Is there though anybody who worked with ASP.NET MVC before, or Web API? About 5 people. ASP.NET is the web framework, or if you want to create web applications using .NET programming language. So what I noticed is when I'm doing, sometimes I do code reviews, and I find this issue in many of the code reviews I've done before. And basically what mass assignment is basically, again, this is the Wikipedia definition. Mass assignment is a computer vulnerability where an active record pattern in a web application is abused to modify data items that the user should not normally be allowed to access, such as password, granted permissions, or administrator status. In other words, you can, like a user is able to post data that they're not supposed to do, or be able to post. Okay, so for example, let's say I have a user screen, and the user should only be allowed to update their first name and last name. Again, this is a trivial example, but they were able to modify the role as well, although that role doesn't exist on the screen. Okay, just quickly, I'm going to go through the concept of ASP.NET and how it works. So ASP.NET MVC is using the model view controller pattern. So you have a model which is represented by a class that has attributes that are called properties in .NET. We call them properties. We have the view, which is your HTML, and also you have the controller. The controller is the class that manages your business logic. By default, Visual Studio has toolings to generate the controller for you with default action methods. So the controller of actions method, by default, it will generate the index, the create, the edit, and the delete action methods for you. And it will wire all that together, like the model, generate the view for you, and also generate the data access layer that will write the code to the database. So you can be up and running in seconds using those tools. But again, sometimes you need to be careful because the code that's generated is not what you want. So you need to go and modify that code. So I'm just going to, okay, so this is the concept, so we know what the controller does, and the model, and the view. So in this example, we're going to go through the create method, or the create example. So when hitting the submit button, so this is a form that the user can use to create other users, or a user. So when hitting the submit button, it will call the create action method in the user's controller. So by submitting this form, it will be submitted to the create action method, which is in the user's controller. And what ASP.NET will do for you is going to take that data and create a user object that can be used inside the create action method. Is this clear? It's easy, right? Okay, so how is the binary work? So how is that data is converted to a user object? So there is something called the binder, which is we don't see here. So if we don't specify a specific binder in the method here, it will use the default binder. So what the default binder will do, basically when that data is posted to the controller, it will say, okay, and to the create method, it will say, okay, this method is expecting an object of type user. So what the first thing it's going to do is going to create an instant of that object, and then it will go through the parameters that are passed from basically the request or the post request, and say, okay, I have a user, so I have a first name attribute or parameter. So I'm going to try to it's going to use reflection to match that with the property. So we're going to say, okay, I have a first name parameter, and I have a first name property. Behind the scene, it's going to do user.firstname equals the value of the first name. And it's going to do it for each one of those properties. So again, if you're using the default scaffolder, this is the same object that's going to write to the database. This is the default. So it doesn't use what we call a view model, which is just a subset of the class, of the class that's used to write to the database. Okay. So with tools like Burp, extra fields can be injected to the requests, like in the previous, and passed to the action. So in this example, the view is expecting first name, last name, and all, but I can intercept that request and, for example, assign an isAdmin attribute, or pass the isAdmin attribute or parameter to, in the request, and if the logic in the controller is expecting, it will generate a different view or will have a different workflow if the user is an admin, then this is where the hacker can exploit this vulnerability. Is this clear? Yeah. So let's do a demo. Probably a tool that not many people use here, Visual Studio. Yeah.
Remember, Microsoft bought the pizza.
It was a coincidence that I'm speaking about this and Microsoft paid for the pizza. It wasn't because of me. So again, in Visual Studio you have a folder called models. So we have the user model here. We have another folder for the controllers. We have users controllers, and we have all the views for the users controller. So we have a different controller called I can't think of controller name. Like buildings. So we're gonna have another folder. So we're gonna have a buildings controller and a folder here for buildings, and all the views will be in that folder. Okay. So in here, just gonna run this. So I have two users. One is an admin, one is a regular user. And if I go to the edit screen, I am, as a user, I am not allowed to edit the O. So for this user, there's some admin data. And for the regular user, there aren't any admin data. So in here, I'm just going to make sure that the proxy is on. Okay, so I'm just hitting save. This should intercept. Just adding parameter role.
Is it admin or is admin?
Well, in this one, I'm just calling it admin, and it's, yeah. So now I was able to modify the data for that user, although I shouldn't be allowed to change that data. And if I go back to that same view, now I'm able to see some other data that I wasn't supposed to be able to see. Again, this is the simplest example of this. I'm just trying to keep it simple. Okay. It's told I only have 15 minutes, so I'm just going to try to wrap this up. Okay, so what's the solution in this case? So the rule number one, never expose your database object in an interaction method. Because you may have, again, in your database table, you may have more attributes and than what you actually want the user to be able to update. One of the common ones I've seen is the last updated date, where somebody can go and modify the last updated date because that property is in the class. But and it's being overridden by this vulnerability. So, and again, if somebody was able to update the last updated date for any of your records, that questions the integrity of the data. So, rule number one: never expose your database entity into an action method. Always use view models. Okay, which is basically contains a subset of your database data. Always grab the fields that the user is authorized to change, because sometimes you may have different users who have different permissions to update the data. So always read that data from the database and only modify the properties that the user that is supposed to be able to change based on their own. That's about it. Any questions?
Go ahead.
Well, there are different ways to find that role parameter. You can either guess, or if you have another screen that shows the role for the user, and then you can grab that name from there. So, for example, let's say you have a list screen that shows you all the users with their information, and including the role, which you're not supposed to read-only field. So you can use that data to be able to do it. Or if you have it just as a label on the screen, you can, from the name of the label, you may think, you can guess that the field name is the same name as the label name, and use that. Yeah.
Have you seen this being used like in real life or in the wild, or is it just something that you figure out?
No, I've seen it in real life.
Do you have an example of how it was used in real life?
Yeah, as I said, the update date, the last update date for the records,
Yeah.
that was one of them. I haven't used the role that much, unless there are. The only one I was seeing for the role is, it's not really related to that. It's if you're not supposed to assign different type of roles. Like for example, let's say I am a regular user and I can create a regular user. I was able to create an admin user by just modifying. I am posting the role anyways in that example, but I've seen it for the update date. I've seen it for other fields like it was an insurance company. I was able to modify extra data that are related to like the vehicles they have, which is not supposed to be able to change.
And did you just figure it out by looking at the source, or you had some inside access to?
And again, I never like tried to hack a website, but usually when I look at the code, I see that because it's easy, you can easily see it. Like if somebody is showing that like the database class in the action method, then this is questionable right away. This is like a red flag for me right away. If they're using view models, then I can take a look at the view models and ask, like, do you need all that data? But this is how it all starts.
Yeah, instead of using view models, do you also set up that as a way to avoid this by only accepting like simple like strings and stuff, and not actually accepting like a user class from the client?
So say that again?
Like, can you also avoid the problem by just not accepting any sort of like just accepting simple strings? So like,
Yes.
like instead of accepting a user class, except like the user, the first name, the last name, just
Yes, you can do that, but if you have like a huge form, then you'll have too many parameters. The other thing you can do is you can have your like a special binder. You can specify the binder and tell the binder which attributes to accept. So you can have a specific. You can specify the binder in the action method where they create like a bracket inside and say you only want to accept the first name and last name. This is okay, but if you want to do it, use it in too many places, it's going to get tricky. Plus, the other thing is if you rename your properties, then you need to go and make sure that the strings, because those are strings, the strings are modified. But if you're using a view model, which is another class, again, with the refactoring tools in Visual Studio, when you change the name of one of the properties, we're going to change it for you everywhere. Yeah, but you can just have them as parameters instead of a class. Okay.
Thank you very much.